What's going on, cactus friends? In the last video, I sowed some Trichocereus seeds for the Rocky Mountain Fresh cactus seed grow-off, and we left off with some of the seeds starting to germinate. It's been a few weeks, and I'm happy to report there's been some great progress. I sowed my seeds on November 24th, and they began germinating on November 28th. As part of the grow-off rules, contestants must share monthly updates. On December 1st, my photo revealed promising results already. Nearly half of my seeds had already germinated, just barely a week after being sprinkled into the soil. Many other growers participating in the grow-off experienced similar results in their update posts. By December 6th, 29 out of my 31 seeds had successfully germinated, which works out to a germination rate of 93.5%, which from my experience is very respectable. I didn't see any white mold on any of the seed casings, and with a germination rate this high, I think it's safe to say that these seeds had been cleaned properly and were fresh. So shout out to Pedro for that. On December 10th, I began folding back my high-tech paper diffusers and adjusted the light so the seedlings were receiving about 125 ppfd. 2 days later, the seedlings were looking green and healthy and weren't showing any signs of light stress, so I think we're good for now. You can see some of them are even starting to produce tiny spines. With just about everything, you want to gradually acclimate your seedlings to new conditions over time in an attempt to minimize your risk of stressing them out. The sooner you introduce more light, the sooner they'll be able to produce more photosynthetic energy, so there may be an inclination to rush this, but trust me, you'll be better off if you take it slow. If you end up stressing out the seedlings too much, you might stunt their growth and really slow their progress down. The seedlings are also going to need to be gradually introduced into the outside air and nutrients. On December 15th, the seedlings are still coming along nicely, and now it's time to start lowering the humidity inside the container. I really like Jerry from San Pedro Mastery's method of using a pen to poke holes in the plastic. I start out by poking just 2 holes in opposite corners, and in the coming weeks I'll be adding quite a few more. 5 days later, and the seedlings all have spines at this point, and some are even starting to work on their second row of spines. You can also see some algae growing along the sides of the container. Generally, if it's green and can produce energy via photosynthesis, it shouldn't really bother your seedlings unless it's covering them and preventing them from photosynthesizing. You do still have to really watch out for mold and fungus during the humid stages of the grow, which is why I still do daily checks. With the seeds coming along nicely, I'm going to begin adding nutrients into the medium. I opted for a perlite peat moss mixture to start my seeds, which contains very little in the way of plant nutrients. The peat moss is a good source of organic matter for microbes to break down, and also pretty good at retaining nutrients. So I'm going to bottom water with a dilute microbe tea that should not only help the seedlings in the growth department, but also their resistance to phytopathogens like root rot and damping off. The compost tea I used for the first feeding was comprised of 0.15 grams of Real Growers Recharge and 1.4 milliliters of liquid kelp extract, mixed into 350 milliliters of distilled water. I also tossed in a bit of a natural bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, also known as BTI. This will prevent the stomach from working of any of the typical pest larvae that may try to live in the soil. The resulting solution was checked and ensured it was at a pH of 5.8. Recharge is a product I use with cacti young and old, and is a dry powder containing some of the best microbes to load into your soil, as well as other goodies like molasses and humic acid. The kelp contains a host of organic compounds for the microbes to break down into usable nutrients, as well as the plant growth hormone kinetin. I removed the seedling container from its bag and set it into a bucket, which I then poured the compost tea solution into. I like to bottom water when seedlings are young to minimize the risk of dislodging them from the soil with the traditional watering. I let my container soak up the solution for about half an hour, and also sprayed a small amount of the solution onto the seedlings with a pipette as a sort of foliar feeding. I do my feedings right before the lights go out for the night, because due to cam photosynthesis, cacti only intake nutrients while it's dark. This applies to both my soil drenches and foliar feedings. After the feeding, I loaded the container back into the plastic bag and poked 3 more holes so it now has a total of 5. At this point, the soil can dry out a lot quicker, so it's really important to not let it completely dry out. In the event that it starts looking dry before the next feeding, I'll spray a little pH-corrected distilled water to hold it over. With time, the seedlings will become more tolerant to dry soil as we harden them off. 4 days after the feeding, and you can see the seedlings are really starting to chonk up. Lots of spines, and there's a few that are starting to look a bit funky. Some of the seedlings might look a bit discolored, but this is mostly just staining from the recharge. A few look like they may be a little bit stressed, so I'll definitely be keeping an eye on them. If we compare the container before and after the feeding, it becomes evident that the algae population really exploded over the course of only a few days. This is no real cause for concern, but because of the added nutrients and microbes, you can see we have some weird stuff popping up over here in the corner. The tiny puffballs, I believe, are hyphal knots, which are the early stages of the fruiting bodies of the mycorrhizal fungi that have been colonizing our soil. If the correct conditions were maintained, these could potentially develop into mushrooms. The scary blue-looking stuff I confirmed under a microscope is trichoderma, and it's one of the components of recharge. Trichoderma fungi are found in natural soil growing pretty much everywhere on Earth and are capable of degrading and outcompeting other harmful microbes that may try to live in the soil. The whitish cobweb-looking stuff, believe it or not, is cobweb mold, and unlike our other fungal friends, cobweb mold isn't ideal, and if left unchecked, it can quickly take over the grow and wreck our precious seedlings. The warm, humid environment inside the container is very conducive to growing mold and fungi, and especially without sterilizing the soil, it's pretty much to be expected that stuff like this will pop up. I made quick work of the cobweb mold with a sterilized spoon, but it's important to note that the longer that the container stays humidified, the more likely that other bad microbes could potentially rear their ugly heads. At this point, I'm actually going to discontinue the use of the heat mat. It was only really needed during germination anyways. It gets down to about 72 degrees Fahrenheit at night at the coldest, which is plenty warm for these seedlings. And by keeping it on, it's just going to increase the likelihood of fungal diseases popping up. 5 days later, on December 29th, is going to be our final update for 2023. The seedlings are definitely still chugging along, and with all those spines, it's beginning to look a bit like the mosh pit at a punk concert. I'm going to add 4 more holes to the plastic to further help decrease the humidity inside the bag. A few of the seedlings seem to be teetering on the brink of being stressed, so I opted to replace the paper diffusers and see how they respond. I used a slightly thinner paper this time, and the container is receiving about 110 ppfd now. Slight discoloration is fine. In fact, if your seedlings are a bright green at this age, they're probably not receiving enough light. A little bit of stress builds character, or something. I'm definitely pleased with how my grow is coming along so far, and the name of the game right now is getting them acclimated to the ambient humidity and nutrients without causing undue stress. With time, they'll only get more resilient. Now that the seedlings are a little more developed, there's already a few standout phenotypes that look like they may have some interesting characteristics, so I'm definitely excited to see what the coming weeks and months have in store for these green little specks in the dirt. I'll be continuing to post grow updates, so feel free to subscribe so you don't miss those, in addition to other cactus content that I've been working on. If you're interested in the grow-off, be sure to check out the RMF Cactus subreddit and Facebook page, which I'll link in the description. If you're looking to read up on growing Trichocereus cacti indoors, or to learn about some cultivars, be sure to check out trichocereuswiki.org for all your Trichocereus information needs.